a Heart for East Asia podcast from OMF US. Rodney Pennington talks with OMF ministry advocate Debbie Merritt about serving in the Philippines and serving as a single person on the mission field.
Debbie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you're able to sit with me today.
Great to be here. Your
story is an incredible story. I know parts of it. I know some of your story and how God has led you and impacted the work that you did on the field. I know some of your story about how God has led you to impact many people in North America and where you are today with mobilizing the next generation of workers. Your story has had a personal impact on my family as you shared it with my oldest daughter, who is also looking into missions. But your story didn't begin in the moment you decided God's calling me to go overseas. Assuming it began, you were young. Can you share sort of your early year faith journey and what led you to the point where you're like, yeah, Jesus, I'm ready to surrender to you, and I think this is where my life is heading?
Well, I come from small town, Ontario, Canada, Midwestern Ontario, and it's a rural community. And I grew up in a family that were just fairly brand new Christians, my parents, and went to a really fabulous church that just was a very mission-minded, grounded church, and it was our spiritual home. And even though all my extended family, 99% of my extended family lived in that community, but we were really the only Christians that were really walking with the Lord. And so that our church really became our family. And so from a young age, growing up in a solid church, I heard about missions. I heard about the Lord and came to faith during Bible camp, which is always a highlight of the year for me as a kid. And also missionaries would come and be the camp speakers. So that was influences in my life. And then New Tribes Mission, now called Ethnos, their Canadian headquarters moved to be 15 miles away from my hometown. And they're missionaries. They go through a 1.5 year training. So and they don't have their own church service on campus. So all the students have to go into churches. So we just had this constant flow of these young people coming through our church that were going to the mission field. And so as a young person, my parents were very hospitable. So after church, we'd often have, individuals, singles, couples, families into our home. And so again, another influence in my life. Then a very good family friend of ours, she went to Bible school and got nurses training. And then she was heading to the mission field. And she used to babysit me when I was a little kid. And she also was at her commissioning service. And this was shortly after I'd become a Christian at camp. Our church had a send-off for her. And at her commissioning service, I can still remember it to this day. I was probably 11 years old or so at the time. It was like the Lord just touched my heart. And he said, are you also willing to say yes to me and go to be a missionary? And I said, yes, Lord, I'll go wherever you send me. I feel like, I'm young. I've got my whole life before me. I've had so much given to me. I have the hope of Christ in my heart. I live in a country where, we have access to Bibles and churches. And I just felt like the Great Commission was for me. And I had to be obedient to him and go wherever he would send me, even if it was to the ends of the earth. So I really had that very much in my heart and was moving in that direction as a young person.
How old are you at this point?
11 or 12. Yeah.
11 or 12. And you're already getting the mission bug.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, that's where I was heading. And I didn't remember that I told anybody. At the time, I just thought this is kind of between me and God. And I think because, you're a kid, you think somebody might say, no, don't do that. Maybe they discourage me or something. But it was very interesting that just before I left for the mission field, I did talk to my parents about it one time and just said, did you ever think, that I would be a missionary someday? And they're like, yeah. When you were like 11 years old, you said you want to be a missionary. And I did. And I was so thankful that God had led me to tell them, because it was like it prepared them. They never ever said anything, but I'm sure it was in their heart. And God was preparing them to let me go. And they never held me back.
That's so cool. So you've got godly examples for your mom and dad. You've got this home that's welcoming missionaries, and they're hearing their stories all the time. And at a young age, God's already speaking in your heart to surrender to this life of missions. And then you have parents that support you in this. That's, man, what a testimony. So if you go to them and you say, did you ever think this was the path that God was leading in my life? And they said, yeah, that was. Was there other support? Was your growing up, and you're really, okay, this I know is the direction God's leading me, beyond your parents saying, we already knew that. Was your church supportive of this? Was your inner circles supportive of this?
Like I said, I didn't tell people that really, other than I told my parents, which I didn't remember. But I believe the huge influence on my life was a couple. Their name was David and Martha. They were Bible college graduates, and they had thought they would go into full-time ministry, but God had led them back to the home farm. And his father had asked him, after he graduated from Bible school, to come home and take over the home farm. And that was a grief for them, because they really wanted to go in full-time ministry, but they really clearly felt God was leading them to come back home and stay on the home farm. And I am just so thankful for that, because that was when I was around 10 or 11 when they did that. They came back they're that much older than me, 10 years older than me or so. And, well, actually more than 10, 20, I guess. And they came, they were like the huge influence in my life. I spent weekends living at their house and babysitting their kids and just living life with them. And till this day, they are dear friends. David has gone to heaven early in his 60s, but Martha and I, she just turned 80, and we're still dear friends. And I tell them many times that even though they have always kind of felt like they failed in not pursuing going full-time ministry, but their ministry, many of us are on the mission field because of them and from our youth groups. So they were a huge influence in my life.
So here you are, young, 10, 11. The next several years are coming along. What's the next phase in this journey towards missions for you?
Well, I mean, summer vacation time, I worked at a Christian conference. It was like a Bible conference camp. It wasn't like for kids. They had a kids part too, but this was like family camp. But it was more of a conference where people would go. They paid quite a bit of money, and then they had speakers come from U.S. and all over. And I worked there for 5 summers. I worked there, and I feel like that was also really strategic in getting to hear all these Bible teachers, because of course off time we got to go to the chapel, so that was very influential and made a lot of really good friends. Because growing up in a small rural town, I didn't have many Christian friends. It seemed like there was, at the point in my church, there was, like, I would go to youth group sometime, be the only one there. Like there was kids like that had gone ahead of me and kids behind me, but there wasn't like any that were right at my age. So it was pretty lonely at times. So going to camp, going to this Christian conference, I made some friends that are still friends today, friends I made at that camp. And so that was really influential. And of course, my friends, David and Martha, were encouraging me to go to the Bible college that they had gone to. And so they even actually took me there to visit the college. And I got to sit in on some classes when I was about in 10th grade. And this is like a Bible college that's 2,500 miles from my hometown. So it's like not just going down the road, but it was really, that was where I was heading towards, going to Bible college.
And everybody's still supportive? Mom, dad still supportive of this? Church family still supportive?
Yep. Everybody's supportive of me. People, like, they sent us, in fact, my cousin at the time, who was a few years older than me, had kind of drifted away from the church and had gone off to a kind of vocational college. And he came back home kind of in a little bit of discouragement and not really sure what direction he's going with his life the summer before I go off to Bible college. And when he saw I'm going off to Bible college, he decided, oh, I'm going to go to Bible college too. And then he recommitted his life to the Lord. And he ended up marrying my best friend at Bible college. And he and his wife have been serving for 40 years in missions. So, but yeah, it was just an amazing experience. The church sent my cousin and I off and made homemade quilts for us, to take, and, gave us money to have for spending money. And my cousin had a car. I didn't have a car. So the two of us drove, straight through 36 hours off to Bible college. And that was, amazing 3 years. And my first semester we had a mission conference. And so I thought, okay, maybe at that time, this is back in the 70s, late 70s, short-term mission trips weren't that popular then. They were just starting to come in and vogue. And some churches were kind of, a little bit, oh, why do you have to spend all that money going on a short-term mission trip? But for me, I felt like I really needed to go on a short-term mission trip to just bring a confirmation from the Lord that this wasn't some just childhood dream that I had. During the mission conference, I looked around at all the missionary tables that were there, and it was at times a little overwhelming. And I just didn't know, like, what mission organization? Well, how do I choose mission organization? And that was really overwhelming. And someone gave me advice at that time, which I've shared with many young people over the years, is someone said to me, it's not so important where you go and what you do, but the mission organization you go with. And I really feel strongly that that's very important now, looking back on it too. But at the time I thought, oh, that makes sense. Our dean at that time, our dean of women, she had just spent 3 years with OMF in Malaysia, at Chifu School, missionary kids school there. And so I just said to her, well, I'd like to learn about the mission you were with. And so she gave me the information. And so I applied, and long story short, I went to Chifu School in Malaysia for 2 months, 1978. And that time, just the preparing to go. And I left a week after school was out, after college was out. So that was a big step of faith. And I was like reading, I'd never heard about OMF. I'd never heard about CIM. I'd never heard about Hudson Taylor. So I was learning, reading about Hudson Taylor, and I was just so challenged by his life. And I really can remember walking like the roads around the Bible college and just praying God to provide for me, because I didn't have any money, and it was like over $2,000, and that was a lot of money back then. And I just prayed for God to provide, and just to see how he provided right up to the last moment. And I was able to go. My church was so supportive at the last, when I still needed some funds. My friends, David and Martha, they called me, how much more money do you need? I told them, and they said, okay, the church is just going to write a check for the rest of the amount and you can go. And so, yeah, that was really cool. That experience really was just incredible. Like, for me, it was like, I don't know how to explain it other than I've told people. I just knew that I was going to go with OMF. And, I said, well, what is the OMF? I mean, it's not perfect. No mission's perfect, but I just felt like these are the people that I want to do missions with. And what is a mission? It's a people. It's not just an organization or what you learn about on a website or something, but it's actually the people that are doing the mission, doing the work. And I was very impressed with them. And I just loved the values of OMF. They're focused on language learning and culture learning, and they value women. In ministry, they value prayer and faith mission. All those things just really were so powerful. And I felt like that's what I want to do. So yeah, I came back from the mission trip, and it's kind of like, I just want to go, but I had to finish Bible school. And that was not easy, because I am not very academic, and I really, really struggled through Bible school. In fact, at one point during my second year, the Canadian National Director visited the Bible college, and I asked him to have an appointment with him to ask him some advice, because I had felt like maybe I should quit Bible school and just go to the mission field now, because I was struggling. And I thought, maybe this isn't for me, And I'll never forget the advice that he gave me. And he said, I would encourage you, Debbie, to finish what you started. And I just took that advice. I thought that makes sense. And even though if I don't graduate, I thought it's okay. At least I did what I could do and go through the 3 years of school. And if I can't graduate because I didn't, make it, it's okay. I did my best. And, but God did above and beyond, because I went back for my third year, not expecting to graduate. In fact, I even told my home church before I left, just warning, I won't be graduating at the end of the school year. But anyways, I am going back, but God did above and beyond what I expected. And I handed in my last assignment on graduation morning, and I graduated. So that was a really beautiful moment, miracle. So
That's incredible. So your first experience with OMF was a short-term trip, still doing Bible college, finishing up there. You come to an end of that chapter of your life with Bible college. Next phase, I'm guessing, is joining OMF long-term.
Well, there was, I'm like, I graduated from Bible school. I'm 21. I'm like, okay, actually I was only 20 at the time when I graduated. So I was 21 in the fall and just thinking, okay, Lord, what am I going to do next? And so I had a few options, but God clearly directed me to go back to the Bible college to work for a year. They needed a cook, assistant cook. And so they had approached me and asked me if I'd do that. And I made a decision. I had like a week to make the decision. And by the next week, I was packing my bags and going. It was very fast. It all came together. But during those months, I was really struggling. I was struggling with, like, God, do you really want me to be a missionary? Like, I was having some doubts and some fears. I was struggling with the whole issue of, because I struggle so much academically, I thought, Lord, how could you really use me? And like, I don't have the gifts. Like, I had this image in my mind and how I observed missionaries. I thought, I'm not like I'm not missionary caliber. I don't have all the gifts and everything that a missionary needs. And I thought, maybe I'm not supposed to be a missionary. And then God reminded me that verse in Luke chapter 12 that says, from everyone who's been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. I thought through that a lot and prayed about it. And I felt like that verse, God was reminding me how much I had been given. And if he only had entrusted me with one spiritual gift, that's all he was asking me to give back to him. To give all that I had, that he had given me. I just had to surrender it to him to be available to use for his kingdom purposes. And so I thought, okay, Lord, if even I only have one gift, I give that gift to you to use. That's all you're requiring of me. And so that was very freeing. So then the other thing I was really struggling with, again, was I had a real fear of learning another language. I'd never learned another language before. And I was very fearful of that. I related it to academic ability. And I thought, how can I learn another language? That was so scary for me. And even as a Canadian, I hadn't really learned French. I'd taken a few classes here and there, but I didn't learn that. So I was like, oh, how am I going to learn another language? But God assured me from his word in 1 Thessalonians 5:24, the one who calls you is faithful and he will do it. And that I held on to that verse so many times when I would want to doubt and have fear that if God is calling me to do something, he will be faithful to help me do it and he will accomplish it. It's through me. And also that verse in 2 Corinthians 9 and 10, where it says, my grace is sufficient for you and my strength is made perfect in weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And all those verses were just encouraging me at this stage. And then the other thing was I was scared of going single. And I thought, how can I go single? I had that dream, as not only I had a dream of becoming a missionary, but I also had a dream of getting married, like most little girls, and they grow up and they want to get married. And having grown up just in a small rural community where most of my classmates never went to college. They finished high school, got married to the farm boy down the road. And that was kind of the culture I lived in. You grow up, you're trained to, you're valued in learning to cook and be a homemaker, because that's what young girls and women are supposed to do. And so I grew up that way too. And I had that dream and desire, but I knew that I had to follow God first for missions, and I didn't want any regrets in my life. And I'd had a friendship with a young man, my late teens, and we got quite serious at one point. We talked about the future, and he told me that he felt God called him to be a farmer. And at that point, I knew that our friendship had to end, our special friendship, because I knew that God called me to be a missionary. And so I made that choice. I felt like I didn't want to have a regret in my life. So I followed my dream of being a missionary, of going in that direction. And I entrusted that dream to be married and have a family. I entrusted that to God, because I couldn't control that in that way, and hold on to both of those dreams. So yeah, I had that time of struggle during that fall after I graduated. And in the middle of all that, it was the mission conference. And I remember there were some OMF missionaries there. And I talked to one of them. And I was also struggling with thinking, okay, I have to have everything figured out. I have to know what country I'm going to, because I didn't really feel called to a specific country. I thought, like, I had to have all my ducks in a row and know exactly like what I'm going to do next. And when this missionary I was talking to had no idea what I was struggling with, and he shared his testimony. And I realized, hey, I don't have to have all my ducks in a row. If I know the next step, I just need to take that next step. And then God will show me the next step. I don't have to know like 5 steps ahead. And so the day after talking to that missionary, I applied with OMF. I just had turned 21, and I went to candidate course the next spring, and I was accepted. And then the mission wanted me to get some more experience in ministry. And so I worked in a church in Toronto, a church plant, for a year, and then prepared to go to the Philippines. Oh, it was during candidate course, I guess, that God led me to go to the Philippines. It wasn't like a big, like God writing Philippines in letters in the sky or anything. It was just I was very open, and the mission suggested to me maybe the Philippines might be a good fit for me. And I prayed about it. I had peace. And so I just said yes to that. So that's why I headed to the Philippines.
Okay. I was going to ask, how did you end up in the Philippines? But that's so cool. You're just like, well, here I am. Send me wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And you're very open to that. It's beautiful. So as you're going through this period after graduation, working, and then making a small move in the interim period before going long term, as a young single woman going out, you had mentioned, it wasn't fully part of the dream that you had hoped to see in this journey of your life at this point. Were you surrounded by people who were encouraging of this, or was there a negativity of this? I can imagine this has got to be a real struggle at points, thinking that I'm doing this major leap of faith, going somewhere I don't even know the customs, cultures, language, and I'm doing this single. How was your support system in that?
I found everybody was very supportive of me. My family, like a family that aren't believers, they, I think, thought I was crazy, probably, but nobody said it out loud, I don't think. But I know I had my grandparents. I remember, I only found this out later, but apparently my grandparents thought I was joining a cult. But I think generally people were just supportive. And, I was young and enthusiastic, and I had an adventurous spirit. Yeah, it didn't seem difficult. It was much more difficult for my family, I know. I know I didn't realize how difficult it was for them, but they just didn't want to squelch, and hold me back from what I felt God was calling me to do. But no, super supportive. And, I mean, here I am. I'm heading off to the Philippines. I've never even been to the Philippines. I didn't even know a Filipino. So it really was a step of faith.
Okay. Landing in a country that you know nothing about, single, working with OMF. What's that like? What's happening?
Oh, wow. I mean, the first months, probably the first year, like it's like honeymoon stage, everything's exciting, you know, it's just, yeah, I mean, there's lots of struggles. I mean, I was a healthy person, but within a week or so, I was so sick, like I passed out on the floor and, they almost got a concussion because, it was just lots of things happen, physically living in a tropical climate. I mean, coming from Canada, I'm used to cold, and you go to the Philippines, it's so hot and humid, and it's just like you're sweating all the time, and it's just very, very challenging. But like I said, I was young. I just was able to overcome all those things, and just I was on my number one prayer request was get the language well, and I was, that was my top number one prayer request with all my friends and supporters and prayer partners. So I just focused on that. Very intense in learning language. I just so thankful that OMF, they value learning language, and I just am thankful for the gift of having 2 years, like 1 year of language school and then 1 year afterwards to just totally focus on language learning. And what a gift that was to give a foundation for my future ministry. And I really leaned into that, and I was thankful for it. And I'm just, as a single person, yeah, there's challenges, but there's challenges for married and families too. And as a single, I think, going out like that, it was just amazing. You can live with the people, and, because I was young, I was like one of the young people. So I just like hang out with the young people. They didn't mind correcting me and laughing at my mistakes and helping me learn the language. It was an amazing experience of just coming alongside the people, eating their food, and yeah, just doing life with them in a quite an immersed way. I think more so than you would get the experience of being when you are married or have a family. So those are some advantages of being single and going out to the field.
Yeah, that's great. So you'd mentioned that one of the pieces that OMF had set up for you arriving on the field, because one of OMF's values is the language cultural adjustment phase in somebody's ministry. So you were privy to do that as your first ministry for 1 year.
Yeah, 1 year language school, and then I moved to the island of Mindoro, where I lived with a senior worker, and I was assigned to a church, and then I continued language study, almost full time, really. I did a few little things, like maybe give my testimony or go to the youth group and things like that, but I had no responsibilities in the church.
So as you're doing this is your we speak in often in like there's terms that missionaries go on. The first term could be a 4-year, 1 year off. What was your first term? How long were you there before you came on your what we call home assignment?
Yes, I was there for 4 years. So after my 2 years of intense learning, language learning and culture learning, I joined a church planning team that was moving into a new town in that island. And there was no evangelical church there. And our team, there was a Swiss couple and another single woman who was a second termer. So I was the youngest one on the team, but she was from Holland. So we had a very multi-cultural team, and we did church plant there in Nauhan, and that was an amazing experience. Learning from my teammates, just making contacts with the people. It really was a pioneer church plant, and just really love that. I really thrive in that situation. And I mean, the Philippines is traditionally a Roman Catholic country, but The Catholicism is not the Catholicism that we might see in the West. It's a folk Catholicism. So they're animistic practices where they believe in the spirits. They're afraid of the spirits, and they've mixed that in with their Roman Catholic beliefs. So because it is a Roman Catholic country, they do believe the Bible, even though most didn't have a Bible. But in the 70s, 1970s, the Bible became more of an open book in the Catholic Church, where until then the Catholic Church had not wanted people to really read the Bible, the lay person. So I get to the Philippines shortly after this transition, where the Bible has being spread throughout the Catholic Church, and they're given out in the church more. And so we were encouraging people to, if they had a Bible, to read it, or if they didn't, then we would give them a Bible. And then that was like the most effective means of evangelism in the Philippines was really home Bible studies. So we would have Bible studies in communities, in neighborhoods, individual Bible studies. And through that, people came to faith. And then we started these home groups, and then eventually led to a church. So during my time on the field, I saw 4 churches planted, and 2 of them in Mindoro. And I was working on teams with OMF missionaries. The last 2 churches I was involved in planting was in Luzon, in southern Luzon and Bicol area, they call Sorsogon province. And I was the only OMF missionary, and all my teammates were local Filipino pastors and workers. And that was an amazing experience too.
How long were you in the Philippines?
I was there 28 years.
And 28 years single?
Yeah. Yes.
28 years in the Philippines single, seeing all these church plants happening. Are there some God at work stories that you could share through this experience of 28 years on the field as a single woman, planting churches, being part of what's happening with the locals? How are you seeing God at work through all this?
Oh, wow. There's so many stories. It gives me goosebumps. Just you asking that question gives me goosebumps because I can think of all the, experiences of working on teams. I love team ministry, and I just love that OMF values that too. And so, I was always working with either a married couple, another single, and sometimes larger teams as well. But, everyone has different gifts and different roles on the team. And I felt I came to see that a lot of my role on the team was what I called I was a can opener. So, and then people said, "What? You're a can opener?" Well, I realized that I was a lot of the contacts we made in our church plants, a lot of them came through me. And I made a lot of contacts, and then I passed them on to my teammates. So I was really a contact maker. And so I did a lot of that. I did teaching too. That's not my favorite thing to do. I did teach, and God enabled me to, but I don't consider I have the gift of teaching, but I did teach.
Are you teaching English, or are you teaching, what are you teaching?
I'm teaching Bible studies. Teaching Bible studies. Okay. Yeah, teaching Bible studies in the local language. And so I love that too.
You could be a missionary in the Philippines. You can go on a missionary visa.
Yes. We don't have to have some other profession or something. No, you can just go in on a missionary visa. It's an open country, so you can do anything. So it's pretty wide open. So that was very exciting to just teach God's word. One thing I learned is, we're always praying that God would open the hearts of people that he is leading to himself. I saw this happen. I remember one community we moved in for the second church plant that we were involved in. My teammate and I were praying for contacts in the community. And so when we first moved in, we were like walking in the afternoon, we walk around the street because often people are out in the, and because it's a cooler part of the day, people are like hanging out on the streets or whatever. And so we'd walk around, and it was a fishing village. And so we just walked the streets and chat with people. And of course, they're like, "What are you doing here?" So we tell them, and we're just praying, for people to have contacts with. And so this one day we went to this house, and there's this older couple there, and we chatted with them. And then we learned the story behind that. Their daughter, who's a midwife, was living with them. Her name was Saul. And we heard the story about Saul. Saul told us that a couple of months before we moved into her village, her fishing village, she had got married. She got married. She never married till she was about 40 years old. And at that point, the Catholic Church was giving Bible to married couples when they got married. It was just something they were giving to married couples. So that when she got married, they got this Bible. So she began reading it. And she was reading this Bible and she just couldn't understand it. And she's a very good reader in this rural community. So she would go to the Mass every Sunday, and the priest would often ask her to read the scripture, in the front, because she was educated. And so she would read. And as time went on, she just was like, God, I don't understand what I'm reading. And one day she'd pray, God, please send someone to explain the Bible to me. And shortly after that, that was the day we knocked on her parents, because she was living with her elderly parents. We knocked on their gate, and she told us later, she heard someone at the gate, and she looked out the window and she saw my teammate and I, and it was like God whispered to her, these are the people I'm bringing to explain the scriptures to you. And so she was our first Bible study in that village. She was, like I said, she's a midwife, and a midwife in a rural community is like the doctor. And so she had, influence in the community, and she had all these village health workers that she met with regularly. So she came to faith. She starts evangelizing all these village health workers, and she's influencing all these other people in the village. And she was getting a lot of persecution from her family because her family had life-size idols in their house, but she really was a key person in that community, and that was very, very exciting. So that was one God story that we just love, and she became a strong leader in the church. She got cancer a few years ago and is now in heaven, but we still have contact with her daughter. There's lots of other stories like that too. It's so cool.
So how did you, going back a little bit, you were talking about one of your biggest fears was learning a language. How'd that end up?
Well, by God's grace, he really helped me to learn the language. It wasn't easy. And I know I didn't tell you, but at one point in the candidate process before I joined OMF, they had us they don't have you do that now, but back then they wanted to get a sense of what people's language aptitude was. And so we had to do a language aptitude test. And they don't tell you the result of it, but I found out kind of indirectly that I kind of bombed out on the thing. Like I failed it. Indirectly, they kind of told me, we want you to get to the field as soon as possible because you're going to have a hard time learning language. So I learned through that number one, it's not all about language aptitude, learning another language. I mean, that does help, but of course, a lot of prayer, and I know it's an answer to prayer, but there's also other factors like personality, because I'm outgoing. I'm not afraid to talk. So I just talk. And then that's, of course, when you learn as you speak the language. Also, I was young. I think that really helped a lot too. I'm musical. So I had a good ear to hear the tones of even though it's not a tonal language, but it's, just the intonation of the language. So I learned to speak it. I've learned to speak it pretty well. I guess I consider I've got a little rusty now, not being there to speak it all the time. But God's grace really helped me to. I would tell people that would come to the field, like short-termers that maybe had some fears about language learning. I would tell them, if I can learn it, anybody can learn it. So
there you go. Yeah, I was the same way. The language that we went into was tonal. And thankfully, I can hear tones really well, but I can't memorize anything. And Amanda is great at memorizing. So together we did well. If we have some listeners out there that maybe they have a daughter getting ready to go overseas single, or they are an individual thinking about maybe this is God that's calling in my life, but I'm single and I do have those dreams of marriage one day. Is there anything, as you look back on those years, any piece of advice that you would like to give towards that?
I believe it's, you surrender that being willing to go single, and you say, okay, Lord, I'm willing to go, but it doesn't mean that you're never going to struggle with it. I don't think I expected that, but I was thankful for some other older single workers that spoke into my life and encouraged me on their journey about how they have journeyed with being single. And I remember one missionary describing it like she said, it's like the waves of the ocean. Sometimes it's calm and you're enjoying being single, everything's wonderful, but then boom, a wave can hit, and it's usually triggered by, maybe a friend getting married or having kids, or just, some expectation where Filipinos, they're always asking you, like, why aren't you married? And would you marry a Filipino? And that kind of thing. And if you're getting that peppered all the time, asking those kind of questions, it can be unsettling at times. Or even going to a wedding, like locally, where sometimes, there's pressure, like, why aren't you getting married? And all these kind of questions. Just being able to be aware that there are times when it's going to be hard. My early years as missionary, it was somewhat easier because I was so focused, on language learning and everything. But as time goes on and you get more settled in ministry, then I was like, oh, I'd really like to have a partner in ministry. And so it's just, I think, being kind to yourself and not denying that there's those feelings and desires, but just committing them to the Lord all the time. I had to deal with, especially my first term was the most challenging, dealing with the local men because I was young and they thought, if they could marry me, I'm a ticket out of the Philippines. That's what they thought. And, most Filipinos want to leave the Philippines because it's, hard. Life is hard there and depressed. And so that, having to deal with men serenading me at my gate and, late at night and dealing with all those kind of things. I had my last few months before I went on home assignment, my first home assignment, I had this local guy who had decided I was going to be his wife, and his mother had decided that too. So between the two of them, they were just like constantly, I was like afraid to go out of my house because I didn't know when I'm going to run into them. And even to the point that the mother showed up at our guest home literally hours before I'm leaving to go to the air, or like an hour before I'm leaving to go to the airport with all these gifts to give me. And wow, I was like so stressed about that. That was very challenging. But in the midst of all that, it was hard because there was like that temptation, like because there at the time there were some missionaries that had married a local person, and so then I'm like, well, could that be part of God's plan for me? And so I had to really wrestle through that, and it was good to pull away, go home on furlough. And that whole first home assignment, I had to really wrestle through that. Would I marry a Filipino? What would it look like if I did? And consider all those things too. And really kind of came to the conclusion that I just felt like, no, I didn't feel like I would marry a Filipino at that point, and just didn't want to get sidetracked from this focus of what God had for me. So that was, yeah, one thing. Another thing, I believe sometimes others, now it doesn't always happen, but sometimes they think, oh, well, the singles have all this time because they don't have a family. And, so singles can sometimes take on a lot of stuff, a lot of ministry things, and they don't have time for themselves. And so I had to learn that sometimes the hard way when I felt like my second term, when I saw a lot of single workers my age and older than me a little bit were going home with burnout. And that made me pause. And I had to consider, like, in fact, they were even saying, and you're going to be next. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do, to stop this happening? And I remember sitting down with our OMF doctor, and she was just saying to me, you can make the choices. And so you can decide how you're going to pace yourself and keep balance in your life. And so that was one thing I had to really learn is just, self-care and, make appointments with myself, because otherwise everybody will have a plan for your life. And so, sometimes they asked me to do something and I actually had put in my calendar, I had an appointment with myself. Because when you're doing ministry, it's hard because you have people coming to your door day and night, and it's tough. Like I had a housemate one time, I wanted to close our door, like not open our door on our day off. And when I say day off, that was another thing I did religiously. You say religiously, but I think that helped me survive, not just survive, but thrive on the field, was taking a day off. And I started my day off Sunday night and it ended on Tuesday morning. And I really tried to protect that. But it's hard when you have, like, I lived with housemates that literally I had to barricade myself in my room, or they'd find me something to do, or they would open the door so that people would come in. And sometimes I just had to go away. And everybody has to find their way, but I knew, because I'm a people person, I just needed to have that time to pull away. And so I was very thankful for our OMF guest home that was just an hour away from where my ministry was for a lot of my time on the field. And I would go there for a day off sometimes. And that really helped me to pull away from ministry and to just recharge and be ready to go back for ministry. So those are just a few things there's many, many things. I could do a whole podcast probably on that, but it's just learning to understand who you are and not get pressured by the expectations of people, whether it's missionaries or locals or, people at home. It's just knowing who you are in Christ and your identity in Him.
Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful advice. Just first off, knowing who you are. Those chapters in your life where you understood that God has led you into ministry as a single woman, and this is who you are at that point in your life. And then also the awareness to say, because of that, people will see or assume that I have a lot more free time to give into other things. And yet there's a reality that it's often neglected, that there's a self-help, self-care that needs to be done. And so having that awareness and being able to say, no, I'm actually scheduling time for myself to get away and re-engage with God. And it's great advice. Yeah, no, thank you for that. But that's your journey, a very small little snippet of your journey on the field, but your journey is not over. Your journey did continue. So where are you at in your faith journey today?
Well, I thought missions was like, I'll retire on the mission field. Like I had that commitment to missions. It was a career. But when I was around 50, the age of 50, so I've been on the mission field like now 25, 26 years, I started feeling a little bit of restlessness. I didn't know where it was coming from. I was feeling a little unsettled in my ministry. I transitioned into a support role those last couple of years. I guess when I was on the field about 26 years, I filled in doing a personnel job in the office and part of the leadership team for a year, which is an amazing experience. I just loved it. And I realized I was very passionate about member care, got some training in that area. And then because I'm also passionate about language, OMF was doing some kind of, I don't know what you call it, but they were just regrouping in the area of how we can more effectively support our field members in language, like beyond just your 2 years, but to be ongoing language and cultural learners. And so that was an area that they asked me if I could help out with. So I did that for a while, but I just didn't feel settled. And I was used to a team ministry. Some of that was, I had to do on my own, and I missed being in a team. And so I was just praying. I thought I was open. I was pursuing, like, maybe there's something else God wants me to do. Maybe He wants me to do something in another field, or I didn't know. I was just praying and seeking. And it was around this time when, again, felt like God was telling me it's time for a change. And so someone had a conversation with a couple. They were not, because it was hard to have a conversation with someone like that on our field, because they wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, go on home or whatever, they'd say, no, you can't leave, So I decided to talk to someone who was off our field, like someone from another field. So I talked to a couple that were from the Thai field, and just had an engaging conversation with them. And they asked me some good questions. And they made me realize that, maybe there is something else that God has for me. And so I decided I would spend a couple of months just really praying and seeking from the Lord if maybe He wants me to go home and there's something else that He has for me. And so right away after I made that decision to pray about it, it was like one thing after another. God just kept, closing the door on different things, different opportunities of ministry on the field. And it was just like one confirmation after another that God was saying, it's time to go home. And I was like, wow, I said, and I really wanted, I felt like if God has called me to the field, I wanted him to tell me that he's calling me to go home. I didn't want to leave without really a clear direction from him. And he clearly showed me that. In the meantime, like, as I said, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but I had been still praying for a husband. I had started when I was about 13, and that desire never left me. I wondered if God would bring someone across my path while I was on the field, but I didn't see that happen. But actually, something did happen. My last home assignment, a friend of mine that had been a very dear friend, who I'd mentioned about her earlier, single. She had been single on the field till she was 40 and then married. And she was married 20 years, and then she died of breast cancer. And she died in Portland, Oregon. And I was home at the time looking after the guest home in Toronto. Just felt really compelled to go to her funeral. And when I got there, I met Debbie Merritt. And Denny was someone that I had known from the Philippines. He and his first wife, Patty, had served with OMF in the Philippines from 1981 till about 1990. And they worked with Muslims. And we didn't really remember if our paths had crossed on the field, but we figured they had probably crossed. But, he's married, I'm single, and we're in different ministries. And I'm Canadian, they're American. So anyways, Denny was at the funeral and he had just gone through loss of his wife to breast cancer a few months before. And so here we were at this funeral for the weekend, hanging out a lot together and talking a lot. And then at the end of the time, he asked to be my prayer partner. And so I go back to the field. And at the time, I wondered, I wonder if this is maybe a friendship that could develop for the future. I didn't know, but it was like the Lord said to me, Debbie, just wait and pray. And so that was in 2008, December 2008. And so I went back to the field in 2009 I went back for another 2 years. And that was during that time, that term when I was just describing to you a few minutes ago about having this feeling that God is leading me to come home. So I was going to finish my term. This is in mid 2010 now, where I made this decision that I'm going to come home. Right after I made that decision, Denny wrote me an email one day, a friendly email. And this is now 2 years from when his wife had passed. And he's feeling more emotionally free to pursue a friendship. He thought, I'm kind of safe. I'm across the other side of the world. And so anyways, this friendship developed. I ended up coming home sooner than I had expected because my mom got cancer. And long story short is our relationship developed until the point that we got engaged and got married in December 2011. So that's pretty exciting. Denny was teaching middle school English and retired shortly after we got married. And then we were transitioning into like, well, God, what do you want us to do? And of course, when the field heard that the two of us got together, they're like, hey, why don't you guys come back to the field? And so there was a couple of different roles over the last number of years that we've been asked to do on the field and even do remotely. But we've very quickly discerned that God wanted us to be here. And we're very passionate about mobilizing. And so the combination of Denny's long experience with students, and he loves students, and my longer experience on the field, just a combination, and we're very outgoing and engaging to students. This has been a ministry that we have just loved. We've been doing for the last 10 years or so. We've been married now 12 years plus, and we just love it. We mostly go to Biola campuses, but we go to Urbana and different other conferences across the country that OMF asks us to go to, and we're volunteers with OMF USA, and we really enjoy it. In fact, I've told people that I feel like everything I've done until now was just preparing me for this. This is what God wants me to do in my life.
You were always like you had mentioned a few times, you always believed in teams, and now you had a new team. The way you and Denny can work together and the impact that the two of you have made and touched so many college students' lives. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I'm so grateful for you coming in and sharing. So as we kind of wrap it up, as you look back over the years, any last words of wisdom?
I think what I would say, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change the path that I've chosen, even though I didn't get to have the kids, that I would have loved to have, because I was 52 when I got married and I couldn't have any kids. And Denny and his first wife didn't have any kids. So we just are thankful for the spiritual children we have. And that always been encouraging for me over the years. And we have many godchildren, like in the Philippines, that's very common. So I have like 20 or so godchildren in the Philippines, and still in contact with a lot of them. But I experience that the safest and most satisfying place to be is in the center of God's will. And God is more concerned about the messenger than he is about the message, that he's more concerned about me being who he wants me to be than I am, that he wants me to be doing things for him, because I'm a worker bee and I tend to want to do things, and God has to continue to remind me that I need to be like Mary, sitting at his feet, and not be Martha serving in the kitchen, because that's kind of what my natural inclination is to do. And so God is teaching me it's more important to be than to do. But yeah, it's just a joy to serve God and to be available to him and to be in the place where he wants you to be, and always willing to hear his voice and to serve him in every season of life. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today.
Well, like I said, it's a beautiful faith journey. It continues on. It's impacted so many people, and it will continue to impact so many people. And I'm just grateful that you were willing to come and share today. So thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
God bless.
To learn more about OMF, visit us at omf.org/US.